Good morning, everyone. This is Xenia here from Alexa Real Estate. I'm the CEO of a real estate company in Adelaide. And today I'm on here with Michael Liebowitz and Carlos Rebollo, and we're going to be discussing socialism. One of the reasons I do these chats in the Facebook group Stand in Your Power is because I like to challenge the ideas that affect real estate and especially affect people's property rights, my landlord's property rights. And I used to actually believe in socialism, but I have seen a lot of examples where landlords' rights are actually eroded. You know, there is a reform happening in Queensland, in Australia at the moment, where landlords are just losing more and more of their autonomy over their own properties. And it's not only property; it's actually people are losing autonomy over their own lives in general. And one of the things that I used to love about socialism is I actually like the idea of this pay it forward system, which I know that Mike was going to destroy in a minute. So I actually like the idea that you know, you're young, you work, you pay tax, and you know, when you actually retire, you retire on a social security or a pension or you know, some kind of comfort, because we can't work forever. And you know, we're all going to turn 65 one day, you know, and so when we're young and working and paying tax and making money, to me it made sense to actually pay it forward for one generation to have comfort, and then when it's your turn, you know, you kind of take it in turns. It doesn't work that way though. And I've actually learned from observation. About a year ago, I came into Ayn Rand and objectivism, and it just all made sense why it didn't work and why my own observations were actually validated. And one of the reasons why I saw that it didn't work is because, like, I'm just going to talk about pensions in Australia. So in the 1950s, I think people in Australia were actually promised by a socialist government. They were promised a pension. So they would pay tax now when they're working, and then when they retire, when they're 65, then they get a pension, they get looked after by the government. My observation, I have landlords that are in their 90s. You know, there was one landlord that was 95 years old. I went to have a look at her property, and she actually drove an hour. She lives an hour away from the property. She drove an hour between tenants. She was self-managing. She called me in because she just couldn't self-manage the property anymore, and she wanted a property manager to step in. So I met her at the property, and there was a sleeping bag on the floor because she was going to sleep in that property. She's 95 years old, and she was standing there with her little frame and a screwdriver trying to change the locks between tenants and trying to do her own repairs and maintenance on the property. And the reason why she was doing that is because she doesn't qualify for a pension. So she was promised it in the 1950s. Now she's 95. She's what is called a self-funded retiree. She has one investment property. So if she pays for a tradesperson, she doesn't have an income. And I thought, there is such an unfairness in that system. Why is something promised and then not delivered? And you know, that is the whole socialist system. And I think Margaret Thatcher actually put it really well when she said, you know, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. And that really is the problem. You know, they promise something and they promise it on taxpayers' money, and then they can't deliver it, because once they get that money, it goes everywhere except where it's promised. Or you know, they might sprinkle it in, like you know, they might throw a few breadcrumbs out, but it just does not work. And I think the one system that does work that I have researched is just free market capitalism, you know, with governments staying completely out of the market and letting the market do what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to give it over to the boys. I'm sure Michael is itching to jump onto these ideas that I've just said. I can see him vibrating. So over to you, Michael. I won't hold you
Yes, he
back anymore.
is. Good evening, Xenia. Good morning, where you
Good
are.
morning.
So before we get into a discussion about socialism, it's important that we define exactly what we're talking about, because a lot of people mean by socialism different things. And I find that mostly what people mean is a welfare state where you have some private ownership and the government, levies heavy taxes and redistributes the wealth. That, while it's socialistic, is not really socialism. Socialism means, traditionally anyway, government ownership of the means of production, so that the government controls what's produced, how much is produced, and who gets what is produced. So a common thing that I've heard often is that socialism sounds good in theory, right? This is not true. And the reason it's not true is you first have to consider that there's two strains of arguments against socialism. One is an ethical argument, and the other is sort of a utilitarian argument or an economic argument. Now, in moral terms, once you have a proper moral code, which I think the three of us would agree Ayn Rand has provided, a code of rational self-interest and a respect for human rights, then socialism's eliminated from the equation right off the muscle, because you say, okay, it involves the initiation of a force against other people, which Rand identified as the fundamental evil, or the biggest evil that there is to use force against people, which socialism necessarily does. And in the case of your welfare state socialism, you have the taking of people's property by force and redistributing it to other people. We have that in the United States as well, at a very large degree, even though people say, well, it's the United States is a capitalist country. Well, it really is not. So I say socialism robs the individual of his property. It robs him of his initiative, his ability to think, of his ability to grow. So for that reason, I say theoretically, on a moral level, it's an abomination. Now, if you go to the economic thing, let me just show you this book here, Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. Now, this was written in 1922. This is prior to the massive failures of Mao's China or Stalinist Russia or the Soviet Union falling apart, before Cuba even went, communist, before any of the things that we know today. And Mises just shattered the entire structure of socialism and demonstrated that it is impossible. Not merely that it doesn't work, but that it cannot be implemented in full. And the reason being is this: in a free market system, we have prices. Prices reflect the subjective value judgments of consumers. So, for instance, if I'm the seller of the computer mouse and you're the buyer of the computer mouse, the price that will arrive at is going to be indicative of how much value you place on it and how much value I place on it. And you end up with a balance, at least, of a price. So now when you extrapolate from that simple example and just spread it around the entire economy, prices demonstrate what people want, where demand is. So that entrepreneurs can see by rising or falling prices where to direct their energies. Capitalists know where to invest. Prices tell them what to do. In socialism, you don't have prices. There's no way to determine what is going to be produced, which is why you end up in Soviet Russia with shortages of bread and other things rotting in warehouses, because there's just no way to know. So I think we need to dispel this idea that socialism somehow sounds good in theory, because I think that allows them a way in. Because the implication is that they have the right moral idea. It's just maybe human beings aren't noble enough to practice it. When in reality, their idea has led to hundreds of millions of deaths from mass murder, starvation, famine, whatever. So I think that we really need to get rid of that idea altogether.
Yeah, I agree. Carlos, do you have anything to add to that, or before I ask a question?
No. What I want to add is that when I came across that book that Mike just presented, Socialism by Mises, the thing that struck me the most was what he just said about prices. The fact that there is and could be no calculation at all in a socialist state. because government is determining who gets what is produced, how much is produced, so on and so forth. And so there's no possible way to trace preferences, values, things that are natural to human nature when they engage in social relationships. All that is eliminated. And so you're actually attacking the very source that provides wealth, health, and progress for communities. You're completely eliminating all of that just by getting rid of prices. Because as Mike said, prices are indication of values that are exchanged between individuals, and only individuals can determine what is worth what. And so this is actually like, I guess calculated and shown in the marketplace where everything, all of the information kind of goes towards. And if you eliminate that, then there's no way you can tell what's good for society at all. It all ends up in just a complete mess. So that's the biggest impression I got from that book. And so we don't even have to argue at all about all the other things, I believe, that other people make when it comes to socialism in terms of its benefits. Because if prices are taken away, if calculation is just vanished, then there's no way to gauge anything at all.
Well, that's very true. So in an example, in South Australia, like in 2021, like and also early 2022, we had this rental spike. The media called it the rental crisis. It was a crisis for tenants. It was not a crisis for landlords. The landlords loved it because all of the rents actually rose up, and they actually went up by 30 to 50%. So real estate agents that were renting something for like $330 a week, all of a sudden it's jumped to $550 a week. So landlords are putting a lot more money in their pocket. Now, that was not due to normal supply and demand curves in an economy. So when you say prices, so I'm assuming you're meaning the supply and demand prices of a natural economy, you know, where you know, supply meets demand and you reach an equilibrium. And if there's no more supply, if there's no more demand, then the prices stay the same. You know, that whole equilibrium supply demand curve that economics run by. So the rental prices in South Australia went up, and that was not due to natural circumstances. It was actually due to the government interfering. So what they did was they shut down the economy in Melbourne and Sydney and caused an influx of people into Adelaide. Now, when we look at the natural demand curve for rental properties in South Australia, you know, they come from mainly two sources, and the two sources are divorces. So one family splits into two, and now they want two properties, and young people moving out of home. So in South Australia, we're at the bottom of Australia, so we don't have this high influx of people into South Australia naturally. So the people coming into South Australia was actually a result of other states being shut down. Now let's look at this supply. Like, who supplies properties to South Australia? And that is builders. So builders and developers, you know, you can't stop these guys. You drive anywhere in the streets, and there's like, they're knocking down one house and building three. They're doing these urban infill projects where they squeeze as much house onto this tiny little postage stamp block and get, you know, 3 stories out of it. So they are really active in providing housing in South Australia. So you think, okay, so the demand's gone up. Where's the supply? Well, the supply was actually shut down too. So the whole supply chain in South Australia was actually shut down, or in Australia in general, was actually shut down by the government because of COVID regulations. So this actually increased the prices in South Australia. So, you know, this is what we call unnatural demand. It has caused an unnatural demand. The landlords benefited from it. So did real estate agents. So what did the politicians do? You know what they did? They started to shame real estate agents. So true story. They got on social media and they said, guys, we're all in this together. Stop putting your prices up. You know, to me, that's equivalent to killing all sharks in the ocean, right? And you have you have all of these little tiny fish that now have expanded, and you're sitting there saying to seagulls eat fish, stop eating them, just stop doing it. When you imbalance the market, somebody's going to take advantage, and that's how it is. If they didn't interfere with the markets, this would not have happened.
Well, here's the problem too, Xenia. Well, first of all, you can see from that, and this Mises points it out, was every government intervention just leads to another one to fix the problem caused by the previous one. So you can see that happening.
Yeah.
So you actually did get to see supply and demand operating in that situation. They just weren't operating according to market principles. They were operating according to what the government was doing, which was creating an artificial spike in demand at the same time restricting supply. So now the problem is this: if you don't allow prices to rise in circumstances, you just end up with further shortages, because now more people want to buy them because they can afford it, but you don't have the supply to meet that demand. So you end up with a problem no matter what you do. It's whatever happens, whenever they institute things like price controls. So I think that you provided us with a phenomenal example of just how sort of mission creep, for lack of a better term, happens. The government steps in to fix a perceived problem, and then that makes a bigger problem. So now they have to, first they shift blame and put it on somebody else, and then they get back involved in the economy again, creating further problems, and it grows and grows until you have all-out socialism, unless something intervenes to stop that from happening.
Correct. So my question, well, what I would like to discuss is, do people actually want freedom? Because, we know that socialism doesn't work. Why do people actually want it? And what is actually behind it that's causing it? And we can go further than that. Well, I actually know the answer. I don't think people do want freedom. I think people are scared of freedom. Because when we look at the example of even Hitler, right? They wanted Hitler as an actual president, even after he published Mein Kampf, right? Which he actually told people that he was going to be an authoritarian, but they still wanted him to take the money from these rich capitalists, the Jews, and distribute that wealth. So do you think there's a little bit of jealousy behind it? Is that what is driving it? Is it driven by envy?
There's a tremendous amount of envy. Ayn Rand actually wrote an essay called The Age of Envy. And Mises wrote a book called The Anti-Capitalist Mentality, and they actually address this issue. And yes, I think that envy has a lot to do with it. But I also think that there's a part that says, well, they're not going to be robbing me. They're going to be robbing somebody else and giving it to me. And as long as everybody thinks they're going to benefit from it, then sure, you're going to have the sort of drive toward that. But at an even deeper level, and here again, I think Ayn Rand was spot on, is she postulated, or I don't know, maybe it wasn't a postulate, but she asserted that it's ultimately the altruistic ethic, the altruistic morality, where if you believe that individuals are to be sacrificed for others, well, then why not have socialism? Then by definition, your success is an abomination, and you should be sacrificed for somebody else. And that, I think, is what needs to be attacked. The idea that somehow we're here to live for other people, that you're here to live for me and I'm here to live for Carlos. Well, if everybody's worth living for, then why can't people just live for themselves? It doesn't make any sense. It's riddled with internal contradictions. But people, it seems to me, by and large, don't think through those things, and then you end up with the sort of problems that we have today. But there's also a massive amount of misinformation out there about capitalism, what it is. Like, people will say, oh, America is a capitalist country. Well, kind of. I mean, there certainly are capitalist elements, and we certainly were more of a capitalist country than any other place that I'm aware of. But those days are long gone. And even when they were here, it wasn't pure capitalism. There was still a lot of government intervention in the economy, if not at the national level, then at the state and local levels.
Yeah, Carlos, do you have anything to add to that? And Michael,
No,
can I just say, sorry, your microphone is, I don't know, your audio is just coming through a bit muffled. I don't know why.
It's starting to get a little choppy.
Yeah,
I
but that's
can
okay.
plug
We'll
in
deal
my
with it. We'll just keep pushing through. That's okay.
what's wrong with my computer. I think Carlos has something to do with it.
Oh, okay.
No, I was just thinking about your question in terms of freedom. And I think it's important to state that freedom alone doesn't get the job done. I mean, we could all wish for it as much as we want, but if we're not willing to be responsible and act in a way that actually, gets us what we need to thrive in society, then freedom means absolutely none. You take Ayn Rand, for example. She came into America and saw incredible freedom. But when her sister came over, she couldn't take that kind of freedom. So many choices actually, depressed the hell out of her, and she didn't want anything to do with America. And she ended up leaving. And so I like to think about those two persons when I consider freedom, because for one, she saw enormous potential, even though she had a lot of problems with the political culture in America. But nonetheless, for her sister to come from an impoverished country and completely freak out at having to choose between so many toothpastes, that speaks to the kind of responsibility that is required when you have the freedom that people, always claim to want, but are not willing to be responsible.
Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Xenia, real quickly, I hooked up my microphone. Do I sound better, or am I still muffled?
Oh, you sound worse.
Still, really?
Yes.
Huh.
Okay, let's just move on. It doesn't matter. We can understand a muffled Michael.
Yes, we can.
No, it's all good. So does individualism actually mean that you're alone in the world? Is that
No.
what this is what a lot of people actually think?
Yeah, well, that's what they claim because they set up a straw man argument that
Michael, we
can
can't see
easily.
you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
But you just disappeared. There you go.
No.
All right, now you can see me. I got all kinds of problems here. Again, I'm blaming them all on Carlos. It seems that since I've known him, I've had nothing but problems in my life. Okay.
Okay, so does individualism mean that you're standing alone?
No, of course not. And that's ridiculous because nobody does that. Nobody stands alone. To me, what individualism means is that I'm responsible for my own life. Nobody owes me anything, and I don't owe them anything simply by being born. Now, obviously, I can enter into contractual obligations, agreements, make promises, do all kinds of things that would obligate me to others, but it's just not by birth. People don't owe me. And I don't see any problem with that. If I'm an individual, okay, so if I don't want to spend time with Carlos, I don't have to. If he doesn't want to spend time with me, he doesn't have to. But if each of us decides that we wish to spend time together, or with a third, fourth, fifth party, whatever, none of that negates the idea of individualism. Individualism at its base just means that each person has to, by necessity, by definition, do his own thinking. Nobody else can think for you. You ultimately have to do the thinking and do the choosing yourself. Now, you can be influenced by somebody and allow somebody else to dictate to you, but in the end, it's still you that has to do the thinking and the deciding.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and what I found about the idea of individualism is that no matter how much people preach self-sacrifice and selfless concern for others, they require and need an individual. Because everybody that opposed me when I started to learn about these principles and started to take responsibility for my life and say, if nobody can think for me, then it's up to me to figure out what's required of me in order to be successful. These very same people, when they would come across problems, would reach out to me and ask for help because I was doing the reading, I was doing the work, I was thinking critically. And so no matter how much they hated it, in their times of trouble, they would reach out to the very person they knew that they could count on to give them the kind of information that would help them out. So no matter what I found people to preach in terms of selflessness and self-sacrifice, they need something to hold on to in order, to sacrifice something, I guess. Something has to be in existence, something has to be produced, something has to be worth something, no matter how much they deny it's worth. in order to take advantage of it when they feel that their whole world is crashing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I can actually speak for capitalism because I proudly call myself a capitalist. And I think I've earned that because I have actually incorporated and grown some businesses. And I am incorporating some new businesses this year. And I can tell you it's not alone. You cannot do it alone. Well, first of all, you need clients. And I have to actually prove myself. So in order for me to survive, I need to actually create some value and exchange that value for somebody who sees value in what I'm proposing. And if I don't do that, if I don't prove myself, then I don't eat, and my kids don't eat. So this is how entrepreneurs survive. I can understand that not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, and that's why entrepreneurs create jobs. Because it is very, very difficult to be a capitalist and incorporate businesses from the start, because you get no help. You're on your own trying to come up with an idea and establishing it to a market, and it is a very, very difficult job, but it is collaborative and it is symbiotic. You know, that is what capitalism is. When we say that, when we're talking about individualism and not being sacrificial, what I think we mean is we don't like, what's the word I'm looking for? We actually don't like, what we don't like is entitlement. So would you say that is correct? Like somebody being entitled to what I have created. So what I have created, I built this house that I'm in at the moment. You know, I built my businesses from scratch. Absolutely nobody is entitled to that unless I decide to give it to them. So like
they're still not, Xenia, hold on one second, but then they're still not entitled to it. You've just chosen to give it to them out of an act of generosity, or maybe you're trading it to them. And if they give you something of value in exchange, well, then they would become entitled. But just because you decide to share it doesn't mean they're entitled. I think you're right that that's a big thing that people have a problem with, is that others think that they're entitled to your wealth, your effort, your brains, your thinking, your time. And it's just simply not the case. Back to what Carlos said for a second, when he said they need something to be sacrificed. Carlos actually posted on Facebook the other day a quote from Ayn Rand that says that something to the effect of evil is infinite. It's dependent on the good to survive. And what that means is, if you think of good in terms of independent thought, production, creativity, evil creates nothing. It by definition needs the good in order to survive. So that's what that means, basically. That quote is that if the good didn't exist, evil couldn't exist. The good can exist without evil. Evil cannot exist without good. It lives as a parasite off of the good.
Yeah, and like going back to socialism also in terms of the government, if you think about the government, it cannot survive on its own. It has to depend on the kind of wealth that's being produced by the very citizens it is entrusted with protecting their rights. So I don't see how, we can make sense of the fact that the very entity that we're paying to not only allow us to produce the kind of things that keeps us alive, but also keeps their lifeblood pumping, can deprive us of the very thing that does both. And so for me, that whole thing falls apart. But I think that the other problem with socialism is this idea of inequality. And I want Mike to actually take control of this when I introduce it, because I think it's important to throw out there, is that at its base, what we're talking about is human action. And what Mises taught me to reason from the very first premise is that action at its root is an exchange of one state of affairs for another. And if your actions reflect that, then immediately what is being said here is that there's an inequality already there. If I'm identifying something that I have to exchange for something else, then the idea of inequality is something that has to do with our relationship to nature. And so if I'm looking for one value over another, inequality is always there. If I want to trade something with you for something that I have, there's an inequality there. And so what we're trying to find here is a balance. The question is, how do we strike that balance in a just way that doesn't sacrifice individuals, rather than saying the rule is the sacrifice. All we have to worry about is who it falls to and who it doesn't. So Mike, can you get on that, please? Because this is something that drives me crazy when people speak of inequality as if it's something that's completely divorced from human nature.
Okay, so you've spun quite the web that you want me to untangle. So let me give it my best shot. So yes, Mises started his entire economic theorizing the idea that human beings act, and that by necessity, every human action is the attempt to exchange a state of affairs that a person deemed less desirable for one that's more desirable. Easier way to say that is all human action is ultimately directed toward profit. So all the anti-profit apostles out there, what they're really hating is human nature and human action and what it is, because you're always trying to make your circumstances better from your perspective. So now that doesn't rule out self-sacrifice. On my value scale, I might value altruism, so I act and I sacrifice myself for somebody else. But nonetheless, in my thinking, that would be a better state of affairs than I was currently under. As far as the equality thing, Carlos said something that kind of disturbed me. You said what we're looking for is the balance. And I would say no, because what you're saying is that there's got to be a top-down solution where we're going to figure out how to strike this balance. When that's not the case. People just need to be free. People need to be free to pursue their dreams, pursue their goals, make the most out of their lives, and live their happiness. And it's not for anybody else to decide how they should or shouldn't do it, as long as they're not violating anybody else's rights. And as far as equality goes, equality in what? You know, I'm not the most handsome guy in the world, so I'm upset that I'm not the most handsome guy. I think the government should step in and make everybody equally handsome. I'm only 5'8". You got guys 7 feet tall. I want some equality there. Your hair is nice and dark. My hair is gray. Well, why is that? Why can't we be equal there? I mean, we can go on ad infinitum with ways in which people are unequal. The socialists tend to like to focus on monetary equality. Why, I don't know. But you know, people are born with different parents and different environments and different generations. So to expect that there would be an equality of outcome in terms of monetary outcome, it's just non-existent. It's a fiction, and it's nothing to be aimed at, because if everybody's just going to make the same, you're going to, first of all, destroy the incentive of anybody that's going to do better. And as Xenia pointed out earlier, it's by striving to do better that entrepreneurs, through seeking their own interest, actually create a better world for everybody. They increase the capital stock, they increase the amount of income, the amount of products, and everybody's better off. But I will say that even that, I don't think is the right argument. I think the right argument is that capitalism ultimately allows the entrepreneur to keep what he earns and allows everybody else to do the same. It allows people to thrive.
Exactly.
I don't know if I tangled it for you, Carlos, but I hope so.
You did.
All right. We're on to something here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that you've said. You know, free market capitalism is what makes the world. And if I like to give examples so that people can actually relate to it. So I'm actually a refugee from Cyprus. You probably didn't know that. I'm a refugee to Australia. So I actually was not born in Australia, but I actually came from a very, very poor background. So my family in Cyprus were actually really poor. They were under the British rule for a long time. Who were actually taxing the farm. They were farmers. They were actually taxing the farmers to death. They were taxing them both in monetary, taking money, and also taking stock. So taking their livestock, taking whatever to because they had a treaty with Cyprus with Turkey. And they had taxes to pay to the Turkish Empire or something like that. But yeah. So Britain made this treaty with Turkey and then put the taxes onto the poor farmers. So long story short, my my family got out of poverty, and they didn't do that through socialism. They actually did that through capitalism. One of my uncles picked up an iron thing, and he created a factory that creates some electrical thing that goes behind plugs or something. But it was through capitalism. They created factories, and they ended up employing and supporting their whole entire family, and that lifted the whole family out of poverty. Now, I don't think socialism can actually do that. And you know, and the proof there is that the British actually did throw some scraps to the poor farmers, you know, in terms of tin cans of food, and you know, all sorts of socialist things and welfare and all of that. That did not help. What actually helped is building businesses and building factories and employing people and just expanding that empire. That is what the thing was that lifted everyone out of poverty. Also, if you look at, have you heard of the Grameen Bank? Have you ever researched Muhammad Yunus?
No.
So
That name sounds familiar. Muhammad Yunus.
You have heard of him?
I've heard that name. I don't know from where though.
All right. So he was a guy in Bangladesh who was walking down the street, and he noticed all of these poor women that were working for $1 a day. And he asked them, why don't you, and they were making stools and chairs and all, you know, all sorts of things. And he asked them why would they not start their own business? And they said they didn't have the capital to do so. So he took $20 out of that. He asked, how much do you want? And they said $20. So he took $20 out of his pocket and gave it to them. And then there was another one and another one and another one. So he incorporated the Grameen Bank, which is microloans. So he was doing microloans for poor people to start their own businesses, and that actually helped to lift them out of poverty. Now, that was actually called the social project, which I think is the wrong thing, because what he actually did was he introduced poor people to capitalism, and that capitalism helped them to take control of their life. So, you know, I just want to provide some social proof to what you're saying, Michael, because I think it's absolutely important that people understand what it is that we're actually talking about. Because people view socialism, people view capitalism as something other than what it is. You know, it is taking responsibility for your own life. So how can you even challenge that?
Well, I think we also have to introduce the definition of capitalism, because in between everything you're saying, you know, there's countries here negotiating between each other, the government, against its citizens, and punishing them and preventing them from engaging in their own private affairs. And here comes your uncle sneaking under all of those laws and regulations and oppression and saying, I'm going to do what I need to do creatively in order to produce for my family. And this kind of wealth was created where you were able to actually get out of there. So it's important now to introduce capitalism, the definition, so that people can understand how it distinct from socialism. And my understanding of it in plain terms is non-government intervention in free markets. And Mike, if you want to add on to that, you can clarify it a little bit more, maybe bring it down a little bit.
Okay, can you guys see me?
Yes, we can see you clearly.
Okay. So capitalism is ultimately defined as private ownership of the means of production, as socialism is government owns the means of production, or community ownership of the means of production. But implicit in capitalism, Carlos, is you're right, is its non-intervention into the economy. It's a free market where people are allowed to freely exchange their goods and services for other goods and services. So I just want to bring something back a little bit. So we started off with the idea that socialism sounded good in theory, and I kind of provided a theoretical argument against it. But it's important to note that theories are only good if they actually have explanatory power, if they actually explain what is going on or have predictive value, can tell you what's going to happen. So Xenia, you provided a good example from your own experience and the experience of Muhammad Yunus, I think you said his name was. But we also now, which Mises didn't have in 1922 when he wrote Socialism, is we have the historical record. So if you take, a given set of circumstances where you have basically the same people and the same type of land in terms of resources, and you compare the more socialist countries to the more capitalist countries, because there's never been a peer of either. But if you look at, say, Hong Kong, which was relatively capitalist, versus China, which is relatively communist, and you see how Hong Kong's performed, or if you look at Taiwan and mainland China, or if you look at North and South Korea and how South Korea vastly outperforms North Korea, or at the time of the when the Berlin Wall was up, and you look at East and West Germany, where West Germany vastly outperformed East Germany, or if you look at Cubans in Florida versus Cubans in Cuba, it becomes readily apparent where people are able to thrive, and it's under capitalism. And I don't think it's no small fact that it's the communist countries that had to try to force people to stay in. The capitalist countries are where more and more they want to keep people out, which I don't agree with, but nonetheless, it demonstrates the point that people want to come to more free countries, and they want to come for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Carlos, do you want to say anything to that?
No, that was good.
Yeah, that was awesome. And look, I want to provide another example, just going back to what Carlos said before. And you said something like the government needs capitalism. So who was it that said that evil needs the good? I think it was Michael. But the example of that is tax breaks. The government actually needs rich people, right? They need rich people, and that's why there are tax breaks, because if the rich people shrugged, disappeared, then the whole thing falls apart. And that's why you incentivize them as much as you can to keep them there so they can keep milking them. Isn't that the way that it works?
No, it is.
Places, yes.
What baffles my mind is that a lot of people, when they say, the top 1% owns all of the wealth rather than produces it, but that's a whole different argument. What blows my mind about it is that I think in terms of if 1% can produce so much wealth, how much wealth could the whole entire world produce if government got the hell out the way? And this is what blows my mind, that the tax rate at which people who are trying to rise to the middle class and the middle class that's trying to rise to the upper class, like these people are getting taxed to hell by the government, but nobody pays attention to that at all. It's all the rich people's problems, and they're the ones that are at fault.
Because they're exploiting envy. I think it's the exploitation of envy that keeps it all in place. But we should actually wrap it up, because we've been on here for about 40 minutes and it's getting a little bit long. Do any of you have any final remarks? Anything final?
I actually do. I just want to say that socialism robs the human spirit. It robs ingenuity, it robs creativity, whereas capitalism unleashes these things. And I just love what you're doing here and having us on and coming out with this show and what you do with the Facebook chat room, because the more people that can be convinced of capitalism's greatness, I think the better chance humanity has of thriving.
No, thank you. No, you can't unsee what you see. And if anyone has any doubts of the evils of socialism, I would encourage them to watch George Orwell's Animal Farm and 1984, because that's what it's all about.
What I would encourage them to do when they speak about forcing other people to give up their money, or to force relationships and discrimination and all kinds of inequalities that they talk about, I'll give them an example about a person that I know who tells me they always vote for Democrat, no matter who it is. And I asked them, well, why? Because they're Hispanic and they're Democrat, and we have to support that system. And I asked them, well, would you let a Puerto Rican just come into your house that you didn't know and sleep over? And the response is, hell no, absolutely not. So the conclusions that they're willing to follow politically from their premises, they're not willing to follow in their own personal lives in terms of their relationships, the friends that they that they choose, the clubs that they patronize, so on and so forth. So I don't understand why then it's good politically, but not for their personal lives.
No, it's not good to encourage entitlement in society at all, because that's going to go beyond money. That's going to go to your, entitlement over your body, which we've already seen, and entitlement over your own life. You won't be able to move if we encourage that kind of behavior. So what we want is freedom. So thank you guys for coming on. I will post this on the group chat, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right, beautiful.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Xenia.